Something is not right about this. I'm telling you, Anthony was murdered.
You can't in your wildest dreams imagine that, someone that you know is capable of being a serial killer.
He was leaving evidence and clues all over the place. Yet the police failed to connect the dots.
The murders committed by Stephen Port are crimes that shook Britain.
The ambulance, what's the address of the emergency?
Barking, East London. In the early hours of June the 19th, 2014, a call is made to the emergency services about a young man who's collapsed in the street.
Cook Street, there's a young boy. Looks like he's collapsed outside. I don't know.
Outside of which number?
4758.
Sorry?
4758, I think.
When the emergency services arrive, they find the body of 23-year-old Anthony Walgate propped up against the entrance to a block of flats. He is pronounced dead at the scene. The man who made the 999 call, claiming to have found the body, has disappeared.
There was 50 missed calls, there was texts from everybody in the family, friends, saying, ring home urgently. My husband come running out of the shower, what's the matter, what's the matter? And I just said to him, Anthony's dead. Anthony's dead. And he was just looking at me as if I was insane. It was absolutely the worst minute of my life.
Police inform Anthony's mother that when he was found, there was no obvious signs of injuries, and he was fully clothed, although his top was slightly pulled up his chest. His black holdall was found nearby, but his mobile phone is missing.
When I made the initial call to the detective sergeant to find out what had happened, he just said, we don't know, he's been found dead in the street. It was then that I'd said, has he been shot, has he been stabbed, beaten up, what? We don't know, he's just found dead in the street. We'll let you know as soon as we can.
With little information to go on, Anthony's bereft mother is left in the dark about her son's death. One crucial piece of evidence the police do reveal, however, is that a small brown bottle containing remnants of the illegal drug GHB has been found with Anthony.
GHB is a colourless, odourless liquid that was originally developed as a local anaesthetic. More recently, it's been used as a drug to enhance confidence, but also sexual pleasure, and is particularly common among gay men involved in the chemsex scene.
So-called chemsex is the term used to describe the use of drugs to enhance sexual pleasure. More often practiced in some gay communities, it can involve high-risk behaviours.
People take GHB by taking very small doses of just 1 to 2 mils orally, often dissolved in a drink. And once they do that, the effects come on very quickly within about 15 minutes. Primarily, people take GHB to socialise, for sex, and also to sleep. Small doses of GHB can make people feel quite confident. It can disinhibit them, make them a little bit more chatty. But if you take too much, and there is a tiny difference between the dose that makes you happy and horny and the dose that makes you pass out, then you can run into risks.
At this point, Barking and Dagenham police decide there are no suspicious circumstances surrounding Anthony's death. Retired Metropolitan Police Detective Sue Hill explains how she thinks the investigation continued.
I would imagine what's happened, a young officer has gone to the scene, the homicide assessment team have come along and said there's no suspicious circumstances, assuming that the person has taken the drugs himself, and then the pathology would have taken place, and no result from toxicology would have been available for several months.
Officers do, however, track down the man who made the 999 call through his phone number and take a statement from him. He initially tells police that he had found Anthony when returning home from work. He later admits that he lifted him up against the wall before making the 999 call. But during a later interview, the caller now makes a dramatic admission.
After interviewing him several times, he then turned around and said that he knew Anthony. Anthony was with him in his flat. and that Anthony had taken the GHB himself and became very ill. He's then said that he'd put him into bed when Anthony was being violently sick, and that when he'd left him to go to work, come back 8 hours later and Anthony had died. So he panicked and put him outside in the street.
Based on the testimony from the 999 caller, police conclude that Anthony's death is in fact an accidental drug overdose, the tragic consequence of a drug-fueled chemsex session that doesn't warrant further investigation.
Many times I'd said to the police, take away the fact I'm his mum, knowing him as a young man, he would not be so stupid. Anthony would never take GHB willingly.
Anthony's friends and family just knew this wasn't what Anthony did. He didn't take drugs, he didn't expose himself to those types of dangers, so it just didn't add up.
The man who revealed he'd moved Anthony's body is 40-year-old Stephen Port, who lives in Barking at 62 Cook Street, the flat next to where Anthony was found dead. Arrested on charges of perverting the course of justice, having initially lied to police about knowing who Anthony was, he also claims that he doesn't know the whereabouts of Anthony's mobile phone. Police take Port's laptop, samples of his DNA, and he is released on bail.
I said, well, you know, aren't you going to question him anymore about it? No. He's told us what happened. Anthony took GHB and Anthony died. All he's done was move his body. From the very beginning, I'd said to him, this is suspicious. Something is not right about this. I am telling you, Anthony was murdered.
It's here that the police investigation into Anthony's death ends, with questions surrounding his movements prior to his untimely end and the whereabouts of his mobile phone left unanswered. Stephen Port remained on bail, charged with perverting the course of justice. Ryan Edwards, who lived on the same Barking estate, is unaware of his neighbour's encounter with the law.
Stephen was an interesting character and a very, very quiet soul. I found it quite frustrating, and I couldn't really develop a more personal friendship with Stephen. He was quite an awkward person to be around socially, and if you were trying to chat to other people in a social setting, Stephen was kind of there and almost a bit awkward.
To compensate for his social awkwardness, Stephen Port turns to online dating as a way of starting relationships.
Online dating suddenly emerged as a really common and powerful and easy thing to do, and he was able to meet many, many people online for the first time, and it was so easy for him, for someone who had been previously quite a shy and reserved person.
The guys that Stephen would normally go for could be described as twinks. That's a term in the gay community for very young, slender gay men, sometimes effeminate. He regarded 23 as his upper limit, which I thought was very restrictive, especially as he was a man, you know, into his 40s and sometimes hanging around and dating with someone who was 16, 17. How much would you have in common with that person? So it was quite strange.
On August the 24th, 2014, just a month after the death of Anthony Walgate, Stephen Port gets in touch with Ryan about a development in his life.
Stephen contacted me to say, oh, hey neighbour, I've got this new guy living with me, do you want to come around and meet him?
This new flatmate is a 22-year-old Slovakian graduate art student called Gabriel Kavari.
He struck me as somewhat different to the normal types of guys that Stephen would meet. He was someone highly educated, articulate, wanted to go places, was travelling here. He came around to mine for a coffee with Stephen. And I remember it being a little bit strange because Stephen went to the toilet and so it was just me and Gabriel alone. And Gabriel said to me, Stephen isn't who you think he is, Ryan. He's a bad man. That's obviously a bit disconcerting for anyone to say to you.
Gabriel Kavari's time living with Stephen appears to be short-lived, with him apparently moving out after only 3 days.
Stephen said to me over lots of text messages that actually he didn't know where Gabriel had gone. There was a gap of about a week. And then I got a long text message from Stephen saying, hey neighbour, I've got some really bad news. I found out that Gabriel went back home, picked up a mysterious illness and has died. And whatever you do, don't say anything to the friends and family on social media, because I wouldn't want them to be more upset than they already are. A very shocking message, because young, healthy people don't normally just die like that.
What Ryan didn't know, however, was that Gabriel's body had just been discovered slumped in St Margaret's churchyard, just 400 yards from Cook Street. Like Anthony Walgate before him, a post-mortem reveals that he has seemingly taken an overdose of illegal drugs. And again, like Anthony, the police conclude that there are no suspicious circumstances. For all intents and purposes, there is no case to investigate. But in actual fact, a serial murderer is on the loose in Barking, targeting gay men, and he is about to kill again.
Yet another body is found just 3 weeks later.
They said it looked as though he'd taken his own life.
In Barking, East London, 2 men from the gay community have been found dead in similar circumstances. A brief police investigation into their deaths concludes that they both died of a drug overdose. The latest body discovered is that of 22-year-old Slovakian student Gabriel Kavari, found by a dog walker on the morning of the 28th of August, 2014. Bizarrely, his friends and associates aren't even aware that he's come to harm.
There were no signs up, there were no posters up, there were no community outreach, there was no communication from any of the partners in the local community. So I just carried on my life in ignorant bliss as to the tragic events that were unfolding right on my doorstep.
On the 18th of September 2014, 3 weeks after the discovery of Gabriel, the family of 21-year-old chef Daniel Whitworth are starting to worry about his whereabouts.
Daniel hadn't arrived home from work the day before, even though he'd sent a text message to say that he would be late, but he'd be home in an hour or so. The alarm bells went off when he didn't arrive for work. I answered the door to 2 uniformed police officers, and they said they'd found someone who fitted Daniel's description, dead in a churchyard in Barking. They said it looked as though he'd taken his own life. It was just an enormous thing to try and comprehend.
Daniel Whitworth's body has been discovered by the exact same dog walker in almost the exact same spot in the grounds of St Margaret's Church as Gabriel just weeks earlier. He is slumped up against the wall with his legs covered by a bedsheet, and again, like Anthony Walgate, his top is pulled up, and inside his pocket is a small bottle containing the remnants of a substance similar to the illegal drug GHB.
We were contacted by the Barking and Dagenham police shortly thereafter, and they explained that there'd been a note found with him.
The suicide note, found inside a plastic sleeve, reveals some shocking information. Daniel seemingly confesses to administering the illegal drug known as GHB, or G, to Gabriel Kavari during a chemsec session that had caused an overdose. Not able to live with the consequences of his actions, Daniel had apparently killed himself.
If he'd have accidentally taken somebody's life 3 days before, something would have shown somewhere. There'd have been some cracks showing somewhere. Nobody's made that way. So that told us in our heart of hearts that he hadn't been part of this thing with Gabriel. That was our gut feeling right there.
Daniel's family are approached by the police to verify the authenticity of the note's handwriting.
It was a couple of lines that were haphazardly scribbled, and could we verify, could we say that was his handwriting? And of course we couldn't. There was a lot of strange things in there, like, don't blame the guy I was with last night, it was only sex. And we were thinking, well, that was the last thing he was ever going to do on this earth. Why is he going to worry about that?
The suicide note doesn't really add up. It just says that, you know, he had met Gabriel Cavari and they'd been at a party together, they'd had drugs together, and not to blame the person he was with last night. It just didn't add up to what Daniel Whitworth was as a person, especially to his family. It wasn't the Daniel they knew.
Despite misgivings from the family about the veracity of the supposed suicide note and the insistence that Daniel was not an illegal drug user, the police investigation into his death concludes. Unbeknownst to Daniel's relatives, the family and friends of the first two victims have already begun inquiries of their own.
I first heard about the murders in Barking when John Pape, a friend of one of the murder victims, Gabriel Cavari, contacted me in October 2014. He expressed concern about the strange, mysterious circumstances of his friend's death and that of other men. I suggested that he should contact the police. He advised me that they'd already done that and found them to be very unhelpful and uncooperative. And so then I said, well, why don't you go to Gallup UK, the Gay London Policing group, which liaises between the police and the LGBT community. And perhaps you could also get Pink News, one of the main gay websites in Britain, to contact the police as well. So John did that, and then he came back to me and said, well, both Gallup and Pink News have been assured by the police there's nothing suspicious or extraordinary that requires further investigation, that his suspicions and our concerns are totally without foundation. There is no serial killer, there's no one targeting gay men, these are not murders, they're simply unexplained deaths.
We were all at sea, unsupported, and we had so many questions.
By that stage, 3 men found dead in unexplained circumstances, all within a few hundred yards of each other, all in their early 20s, all gay or bisexual. You can't tell me this is mere coincidence. The police never opened any murder investigation. In fact, they took this suicide note at face value and closed down the whole investigation.
On the morning of June the 21st, 2014, the inquest is held into Gabriel Cavari's death. Gabriel's friend, John Pape, raises concerns over whether mobile phone records have been looked at during the police's initial inquiries, and was shocked to hear that the officer has no information with him.
You would have thought that when the police were unable to answer questions raised by both John Pape and the coroner would have insisted upon an adjournment until the police came back with the answers.
The coroner goes on to record an open verdict. Later the same afternoon, the inquest into Daniel Whitworth's death is held. Again, concerns over initial inquiries are highlighted, this time regarding the lack of forensic testing on the suicide note, the drugs bottle and the bedsheet found at the scene.
I remember the coroner asking the inspector in charge, he was found on this bedsheet, did you get it DNA checked? Did you get it forensically checked? And he said no, because we didn't suspect anybody else with this, which I found really odd because we'd always been looking for this person he spent the night with.
The coroner's report concludes with the statement, "I cannot say beyond reasonable doubt that I am satisfied that Daniel voluntarily took his own life."
We were left with an open verdict.
That, I think, was a big, big mistake. They went away from that inquest not really having any certainty about the circumstances of Daniel's death.
I was keen to get across, okay, this is an open verdict, let's continue with it.
Unfortunately for the family and friends of Gabriel and Daniel, the investigations into their deaths conclude. And, as with Anthony Walgate's death, there seems to be an unwillingness from Barking and Dagenham police to carry out further inquiries. On the 23rd of March 2015, Stephen Port pleads guilty to charges of perverting the course of justice after admitting giving false information about the death and discovery of Anthony Walgate and moving his body.
I was told at the time perverting the course of justice is a very serious offence and he could get years. And in fact he got 4 months in prison and 4 months on licence. That was very devastating, that part, knowing something was still not right and that nobody would investigate it.
Had the police delved further into the life of Stephen Port, they would have discovered a depraved killer, hiding behind online dating apps as a way of luring young men to his flat to feed his increasing appetite for chem-sex. On June the 4th, 2015, he is released on licence from prison and back into the community, where it wouldn't be long before he would strike again.
I could hear my dad really sobbing, which is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life, and I'm never going to forget that.
After the deaths of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari and Daniel Whitworth during the summer of 2014, their families are left frustrated with what they perceive as an inadequate police investigation and with inquests that highlight a lack of evidence collected. Compounding this, simple inquiries would have revealed that a local man named Stephen Port is connected to all 3 men. Despite this, he is not under suspicion of any further crimes. This lack of suspicion will go on to have fatal consequences a year later, in September 2015.
Jack was very friendly, loving, caring, very family orientated, looked after us all. He was our younger brother, but he was like our older brother. Anything we needed, he'd always be there with a click of a finger.
25-year-old Jack Taylor was a forklift driver who lived in Dagenham, just 4 miles from Barking.
Jack would go out, obviously. Some nights he'd stay at friends, some nights he'd come back quite early. Most of the time, it would be ridiculous o'clock in the morning. So it wasn't unusual for Jack to stay out, but that particular night he had come home.
In the morning, my dad's gone in to see if he was there, to wake him up type of thing, because he was always laying in over the weekend, and he wasn't there. Didn't find anything strange in that, because sometimes he was up and out early, especially when he didn't have work. It wasn't until the afternoon that no one had heard from him.
Later that day, Jack's family received some devastating news.
I'd come out of college and I was speaking to Mum on the phone. There was a police car that pulled up and 3 officers got out. I heard the police officers say, "Are you Jack Taylor's mum and dad?" And obviously Mum and Dad said yes. They said, "Jack's dead."
My dad called me and straight away I said, "Oh, have you spoken to Jack?" And he went silent and he didn't say anything. So I said, "Do you know where he is? Where is he? Has he come home?" And he said, "No, he won't be coming home." He'd been told that Jack had been found in a park and they didn't know anything else. They just knew that he'd been found with drugs. I could hear my dad really sobbing, which is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life, and I'm never going to forget that. And he said, "Can you get round here as soon as possible?" And it was like it was a nightmare. It was like it wasn't happening. And the minute I walked through the door, my mum was standing there holding Jack's shirt that he'd been wearing from Friday beforehand, just wrapping it round her face because she just wanted to be close to him.
Despite being a seemingly healthy 25-year-old, Jack's body is discovered slumped up against a wall, backing onto the very same spot where Gabriel and Daniel were found a year earlier. Like Anthony and Daniel before him, Jack's shirt is pulled up over his stomach, his mobile phone is missing, and he has a small bottle containing the illegal drug GHB in his pocket.
Even in the case where the police believe it's a drug overdose, you have a grieving family And the most important thing, they need someone to talk to. They need someone to talk things through about the post-mortem, what's going to happen, a single point of contact, because they have never experienced anything like this before, and they don't know where to turn.
Eventually we got through to someone that said we was going to get a call back. We waited for that call and it seemed like we was waiting forever. And just as we picked up the phone to call them, the phone started ringing. And it was 2 police officers that had been on the scene with Jack that explained to us they didn't know that no one had contacted us and that they would go to our mum and dad's house and explain the whole situation of how Jack was found and what they thought had happened. They explained that he was found with a powder in his wallet.
We'd asked what drug did they think was in there, and they said they couldn't say, that they don't know. We then asked questions, you know, like, well, with the sexuality bit, do they think Jack was, like, drugged? Do they think he was raped? You know, we asked all these kind of questions and they'd said no.
Some people do have a little private life, but we know Jack wouldn't touch things like that. We definitely know he wouldn't. He wouldn't be around things like that. Basically, we felt like we was being fobbed off, because no matter what we said, they would just say, well, you know, this is the situation and this is what we found.
As the days go by without any news or information from the Barking and Dagenham police, Jack's sisters Donna and Jenny grow increasingly frustrated and start making their own inquiries into their brother's death.
I think it was very clear to Jack Taylor's family that this wasn't right. Once again, there was just a lot of questions and they were just going, no, this is not our Jack. You know, this is not what he did. He didn't do drugs. You know, it just didn't add up for them. And I think that really spurred them on and to take on the detective work in their own hands and do the detective work that the police should have been doing.
At Donna and Jenny's insistence, the 2 detectives who were on the scene when Jack was discovered meet with the sisters, where they reveal they have found a piece of CCTV footage which shows Jack walking through Barking Town Centre with another man at 3:15 a.m. on the morning of the 13th of September 2015. Jack Taylor's body would be found later that very day.
So we was like, why are you not trying to find out who this man is? And they said they would try and find out, but they don't think they'll ever know, which we couldn't understand at all, because that doesn't even make sense. Because to me, that's suspicious straight away, to all of us. We asked if they didn't know who that person was, can we make it public? Like, can we have it put somewhere so some witnesses can come forward to say yes, they saw him or yes, they know him? Or first we was told that they don't think that's a possibility because at that precise moment in time it wasn't being treated as suspicious, but they could try and put in a word for it and see what happens. We constantly kept asking about, you know, time's getting on, and we're going to have this photo and you're not doing anything about it. I don't know if they agreed because they knew we weren't going to shut up. I don't know, but they agreed to put it in the newspaper.
1 month after his death, the image of the man seen with Jack on the CCTV is released by the Metropolitan Police. It's not long before the man is identified as Stephen Port.
It's simply amazing and brilliant that Jack Taylor's sisters were so persistent in getting this CCTV released. It's just thanks to their determination and their police work. You know, they were just ordinary people. They cracked the case.
We should never have been put in that situation, really, because they should have already known what was happening and what had happened to Jack. Not us literally trying to go through it step by step.
Finally, the spate of drug-related deaths in a small corner of Barking were connected. Stephen Port was arrested at his flat on suspicion of causing the deaths of the 4 young men on the morning of the 15th of October 2015. The same day, the case was passed from the local police to a team of detectives from the Metropolitan Police's Homicide and Major Crime Command.
I got a phone call out of the blue to say, don't build your hopes up, but we've arrested someone. We've arrested him on suspicion of murder.
I got a phone call from my liaison officer and he just said to me, We've arrested this person for Anthony's murder and 3 other men's murder. Somebody will be in touch with you very soon. And that was it. I literally just burst into tears. I didn't feel happy that I was right. I wasn't glad that I was right or anything. It was just such a shock.
Looking back, I had the naive assumption, really, that if anything untoward was happening in my local community, that the police would be looking out for my best interests and to be letting me know. I took things that Stephen was saying to me at face value. But you can't, in your wildest dreams, imagine that, you know, someone that you know is capable of being a serial killer.
Stephen Port is interviewed extensively. Apart from again admitting that he had been involved in the accidental death of Anthony Walgate, he denies knowing the other 3 men.
Anthony was found slumped outside your address with a large amount of GHB in his system. The other 3 men we've been discussing were all found over by the wall area of the Abbey. You can see on the map. Again, all of them were slumped against the wall with a large amount of GHB in their body. Can you account for that at all?
No, I can't.
Stephen, did you have any involvement in his death?
I did not know, no.
Did you kill Jack Taylor?
Did not know.
This is serious.
Yes, I know.
Okay. It's really important that you tell us the absolute truth.
I'll tell you so far is true.
3 days after his arrest, Stephen Port is charged with 4 counts of murder. It is now up to the homicide detectives to gather evidence that proves beyond doubt that Port is responsible for these depraved crimes.
They came to Mum and Dad's and they actually said that Jack's body would need to be brought back up. There wasn't enough DNA taken from Jack. It was upsetting for all of us, but more upsetting for Mum and Dad, because they've buried their child. They shouldn't have to go through him being brought back up. It's just not, it's not right. It just goes to sum up just how much this whole situation had been messed up.
Stephen Port was not covering his tracks.
All of this could have been prevented if the police had just looked at his laptop.
October 2015. 40-year-old Stephen Port is charged with the murders of 4 young men whose bodies were found dumped on the streets of Barking, East London. After a police inquiry failed to connect their suspicious deaths, the case was taken over by officers of the Metropolitan Police's murder investigation team.
They were so professional from the start. They were taking notes, and I'd actually said to the Chief Inspector at the time, the last ones that came, they didn't have a scrap of paper with them, they didn't take any notes. They were so unprofessional, they got stuff wrong that they were telling us. And he said, you know, we will do this properly.
The next day it was all over the news, it was all in the newspapers, it was everywhere. And it was all, you know, about GHB, and the newspapers, it was saying about rape and things and whatever. So we kind of already knew that that's obviously what's happened. Like, we know he'd been poisoned, we knew he'd been raped. It's not the kind of thing you want to think about, but you know that's what's happened. We'd already gone through the worst thing, which was losing him.
We just made a pact as a family, Mum, Dad and my sister, that we'd go to this trial every day and we'd do it for Jack, because we owed that to Jack.
Today he was driven into court accused of being a serial killer of young men.
The trial of Stephen Port begins at the Old Bailey a year later, on the 4th of October 2016.
I thought I wouldn't look at him. I thought I wouldn't be able to bear it. But I did. I looked at him quite frequently, because I didn't want to miss any kind of upset that he might feel.
It's strange when you see a killer in court, you trying to look at their face. There was no sort of, oh, I could see it in his eyes look. He seemed quite quiet, quite timid. He showed no remorse. He looked like he didn't care at all.
As the prosecution case begins, the sinister background of Stephen Port's crimes are finally exposed to the world.
This afternoon, his defence lawyer went through the first 6 counts against him. They include drugging, rape and murder. He denied every single one. He was asked, "Did you give your victim anything that would cause them to die?" "No," came the reply.
Revealed to the court is Stephen Port's internet search history on Google and porn websites, including the terms sleeping boy, unconscious boys, drugged and raped, and taking date rape drug.
Before he met each boy, he'd spend 2-3 hours looking up raping drugged boys, how to drug lads, things like that, and it was just reams and reams of it. I'd asked them several times, have you looked at his laptop? And every time it was the same, there's no need to. It's too expensive, there's no need to. We know what happened and it's done with.
While Port continues to deny causing the deaths of the 4 young men, the courtroom comes to learn the sheer scale of Stephen Port's gruesome activities as 8 young men bravely come forward to reveal their own horrific experiences. Men who Port lured to his house through social media sites before drugging them with GHB and sexually assaulting them. Stephen Port's phone contained 83 home videos, 6 of which show men who were filmed when they were unconscious.
Some of them were really horrific. I mean, people who had been given a glass of wine by Stephen Port and they drunk it and then suddenly looked at the bottom of the glass and saw white sludge and suddenly realised they'd been drugged, and they recounted in court how suddenly their vision went blurry and how they suddenly fell asleep and then woke up with their clothes gone and Stephen Port raping them. I mean, it's horrific.
To hear some of the boys that took the stand in that trial was awful, what they had to go through.
Sitting in the trial and hearing the rape victims and hearing what they went through, knowing that obviously that's what Jack went through, it's obviously, sorry. Yeah, it's not the kind of thing you want to think about, that his last breath was with a monster like that took his life, knowing that he might have been scared and he might have known about it.
There, but for the grace of God, it could have been all of them that were dead as well. It just happened to be the amount of drug that he'd given them that they survived.
He was leading a very horrific lifestyle of just seediness and rape and just putting people through horrendous circumstances for his own end, which was purely sexual. And he was allowed to do that for a long time, long before he'd got to our Daniel, long before he'd even got to Anthony.
Nobody other than Stephen Port knows the full details of his crimes, when he drugged, sexually assaulted and dumped the bodies of Anthony Walgate, Gabriel Cavari, Daniel Whitworth and Jack Taylor. Incredibly, forensic tests eventually carried out on the bottles planted on Anthony, Jack and Daniel's bodies showed DNA belonging to Stephen Port, as did the blue bedsheet and the fake suicide note. On the 23rd of November 2016, Stephen Port is found guilty of 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of rape, 4 counts of assault by penetration, and 10 counts of administering a substance against 11 victims. The judge summed up that each murder was committed in the course of satisfying his lust for penetrating young men whom he had rendered unconscious. The result is a whole life sentence, and the defendant will die in jail.
Jack was a loving son, a brother, uncle and grandson, and brother-in-law and nephew, and a true inspiration to everyone that knew him. He was the life and the soul of our family. Our lives will never be the same. And we'd like to thank you all for showing an interest in our Jack, because he meant the world to us.
Sit there and hear that he's been found guilty It's the most strangest feeling because you're not happy, obviously, but you're happy that he's been put away. Sitting in a prison cell, no, I think that's too good for him.
It was a relief that he will never be out. He will never be able to do this again. But it's still not closure for me. Not until the police pay for their actions. It was appalling what they did to me and the other families. And until that happens, until they accept responsibility and apologise publicly for what they did, we'll never have closure.
Almost any armchair detective or trainee or rookie police officer would have seen the evidence before them. They would have put the clues together. They would have connected the evidence.
You don't get circumstances like that where two young people end up in the same graveyard, sitting at the same place. It just shows incompetence, and the families were let down.
What I can say about Stephen Port is that he's no criminal mastermind. He got away with murder because he was allowed to. He should have been stopped long before killing 4 people.
Stephen Port was not covering his tracks. He was leaving evidence and clues all over the place. Yet the police failed to connect the dots.
An independent Police Complaints Commission investigation is ongoing into 17 police officers for possible misconduct over the catalogue of failures into catching Port. The Metropolitan Police is also re-examining 58 unexplained deaths in London involving the illegal drug GHB.
Jack was our world, and we've got to be without him for the rest of our lives. And we don't see why anybody that played a part in his life being taken away should be able to continue with their normal lives when we don't have that. We don't have a normal life anymore. We never will.
I miss the conversations with Anthony, the 2-hour chats on the phone several times a week. He was so full of life and so funny, and he had so much to live for. And that's all been taken away from him now.
I miss everything about him, really. Like, he's never going to be a part of our children's lives anymore. I just really miss him. Like family holidays, birthdays, everything, we're going to have to do it without him. And now we've got his anniversary to face every year, which we shouldn't be doing. Christmas is without him, which we shouldn't be doing. You know, instead of buying him a Christmas present, we're having to take flowers over to a cemetery. That shouldn't be happening. We just miss him.